Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are going to give folks just a minute or two to get on and get settled, and then we'll start up. All right, good afternoon. Thank you all for joining today's webinar. My name is Jessica LeClaire, and I'm a program manager with Sustainable CT. We at Sustainable CT are proud to co-sponsor today's session, as well as the entire Sustainable Municipalities, Innovative Practices and Emerging Trends in the U.S. webinar series with the Hixon Center for Urban Ecology at Yale University, as well as the Sustainable States Network. Today's webinar is the second in our 5-part spring series. We're going to hear from 3 dynamic speakers about getting to net zero and what that looks like in our communities. We will have time after each speaker to answer any questions you might have. Please type your questions in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and I will ask the presenters to reply. To begin our session today, we'll hear from Dr. Ken Gillingham, Associate Professor at Yale University and a Faculty Research Fellow at the National Bureau of Economic Research. From 2015 to 2016, Dr. Gillingham served as the Senior Economist for Energy and the Environment at the White House Council of Economic Advisors. He is an energy and environmental economist drawing from the fields of applied microeconomics, behavioral economics, industrial organization, and integrated assessment modeling of climate change. He has published widely on consumer decisions and policy in transportation, energy efficiency, and renewable energy. His work has been published in top-tier journals across a range of fields, including economics, science, and management. With no further ado, I turn the floor over to you, Ken.
Great, thanks so much. Well, it's a pleasure to speak to you all, and this is a really exciting topic. We're talking about net zero communities, and there's a lot underway with net zero communities that are I think is gonna really make a difference in the next few years. How do we get to net zero? So I want to first just kind of give a big picture, some big picture thoughts about this. And getting that net zero isn't always easy. So I recognize that, but I want to provide, some thoughts from my research about areas that you could imagine moving forward in if you're in a community, as well as more broadly areas that we're still studying and want to understand better. Most of my research stepping back, I'm an energy environmental economist, but most of my research stepping back is really on questions of what leads people to make decisions they make about environmental pro-social activities, whether this is about solar, whether this is about energy efficiency, whether this is about other environmental choices they make, buying an EV, etc. I'm also really interested in the intersection between those pro-social decisions and how to reach marginalized communities. Those are all areas that are really important to me and play a role in my research. So thinking about net zero communities, first of all, I think it's a great goal to aspire to and to work towards because a lot of progress can be made. Much of the focus recently has been thinking about how to electrify. And one quote that comes up often is electrify everything. That's not so easy in some places, but that is an area that a lot of work is being undertaken. Of course, if you're electrifying everything, you have to produce that power somehow. So whether this is community-based generation, so having the local landfill that's already capped with a solar farm on top, or distributed solar on top of homes. There's a lot of room there for producing the electricity that the home is then using locally. when you think about net zero, one could even also imagine that community producing so much clean energy that it exports it, and that can make up for some of those really much harder to decarbonize areas, because there are some tougher to decarbonize areas. And the goal is eventually for reaching, we want to reach our targets, the climate change targets, given the importance of climate change. And how do we reach those in a speedy way, but in a way that also acknowledges the difficulties and allows people to really make some progress. So some of my own work talks about some of these issues. I look into consumer decisions. So I think about what types of factors influence people's decisions to, say, put rooftop solar on. A big fraction of my research is showing that it's not just the dollars and cents. It's a lot about awareness, and it's a lot about community word of mouth and awareness. And so a lot of my research has shown that if your neighbors install solar, you're more likely to install solar. And I showed this in California initially, going back in 2012, and I showed this in Connecticut, where we saw hotspots developing throughout Connecticut in certain areas. And this work was really interesting because it gives a sense about how powerful individual decisions and individual conversations can actually be. Now, of course, not everyone can install rooftop solar. And there are barriers, especially in marginalized and low and moderate income communities. So I've done a lot of work also thinking about how to leverage this kind of word of mouth into two different pathways. One is thinking about community solar options, and another is thinking about community campaigns to influence it. So many in Connecticut, are as well as elsewhere around the country, are familiar with solarized campaigns. So I've worked with nonprofits, I've worked with the Connecticut state government, the Green Bank, on understanding how solarized campaigns work and trying to find ways to get them to work better. But one of the key things that comes about it is word of mouth, people talking to each other really makes a difference. And this can also apply, it's easy for it to apply for solar, but stepping beyond solar, how does it apply for energy efficiency? Energy efficiency is a little tougher because energy efficiency isn't as visible as solar. Often solar you can kind of see on the rooftop, even if you see it on the side of the rooftop. In fact, I have work that shows that this effect of neighbors on installing, so if your neighbor installs, you're more likely to install, is a stronger effect if the rooftop solar is visible from the road. So it's just kind of emphasizing this point that it really, word of mouth and discussing and actually seeing it up there makes a difference in people's awareness. So those and then building community campaigns around this can really play a role. But at some point we also have to move, beyond the initial adopters into the larger community when we're thinking both about solar, but then as well about energy efficiency and because energy efficiency is a little harder. Finding ways to foster word of mouth is really important. And so it's a little bit more difficult. Incentives are also really important, it seems, for energy efficiency. But beyond that, getting towards net zero requires electric vehicles. So making sure that we have word of mouth about electric vehicles. Now, there right now are a limited number of electric vehicle offerings, and not everyone can afford a Tesla, that's for sure. But we're beginning to have more electric vehicle offerings, and in the next few years, I'm quite excited. And Connecticut does have an incentive program for that. But there's room for people to tell their neighbors about how nice it is to drive that electric vehicle should they be able to adopt themselves. The prices are coming down, and in the next few years, the best industry forecasts show that within 4 or 5 years, we could be hitting cost parity with, or even less, we could be hitting cost parity with internal combustion standard cars that we drive, gasoline-powered cars. Those are all just some of the main areas that my own research focuses on that relates very closely to net zero communities. So I want to stop there, and I hope that there are going to be some great questions, and I want to make sure that there's time for a really vibrant conversation. But I'm just really pleased to be here on this call and excited to hear from everyone.
Excellent. Thank you, Ken. Do we have any questions from the audience? So if you do have a question, be sure to just type it in that Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And I'm actually not seeing any questions right now, but if you have one, you didn't get a chance to ask, you can save it for the end. Oh, we just got one. All right, so this is from Cyril. Ken, do you have any need for local studies? Waterbury, Connecticut is looking into these issues.
I would love to have a conversation and see what Waterbury is doing and seeing if I can help and if there might be a possible study. I have lots on the plate right now, but be very excited to speak with you.
Wonderful. And I actually do know the speaker, so we can work to make that connection.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And one more question for you, Ken, before we move on. Could we hear more about researching less privileged communities?
Yes, I cut off that one a little bit shorter than I should have because that's a really important topic and I appreciate the question. I've been working with the Connecticut Green Bank to try and understand. So first of all, one has to be careful to make sure that when you're researching marginalized and underprivileged communities, that you're really careful that it's in their best interests and that you're acknowledging the local factors on the ground. That's kind of, from the bottom line, one of the most important things. And so working with community groups in these communities is just absolutely essential. I have done some projects working with community groups in some of the less wealthy communities in Connecticut, looking at what types of messaging strategies are most effective in different income groups. And so say in the low and moderate income segment, to reach them using solar. For rooftop solar. So these are homeowners, not renters, because renters are another challenge, but homeowners in low and moderate income communities. And we found actually we were successful in reaching low and moderate income communities. Some of it was helped by some Connecticut Green Bank incentives, but some of it was actually entirely separate and not related. Through campaigns that focus on community-based messaging, so really focusing on ways of helping the community. We also actually, interestingly, we're trying this with financial-based messaging, and the financial-based messaging for higher income communities actually worked better than the community-based messaging. For the lower and moderate income communities, we found that we found a pretty similar effect, but that the community-based and pro-social type messaging actually led to greater recommendations and greater happiness with the systems that are installed themselves. So this is a paper recently published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. So that's some fraction of my research, and I hope to continue and plan to continue doing sets of research. But I really want to, the ethics are really important and it needs to be done very carefully when doing this type of research.
Thank you, Ken. And I lied. We're going to do one more question since it's important for the rest of the day, and then we'll let you take a break. Can you quickly define what is in your mind when you say net zero? Is it simply emissions or carbon sequestration or other?
That's a great question. It has been defined in a whole variety of different ways, and there's no single definition of net zero. I'm open to different definitions because it's difficult enough to get down. One strict way of looking at net zero emissions would be, or net zero community would be about emissions, and it would be about actually having offsets or generating more clean power in your community and exporting that would actually be one way to reach it. But there are multiple other ways to discuss what net zero communities means. I generally think about it in terms of emissions, but I think setting targets like net zero is really, really important. But it's a challenging idea to. I see this even from Karen Luther, and I actually agree with this. It's a challenging idea to implement, but one I think that's worth trying and worth putting real thought into and coming to an agreement at the beginning about what that definition that is agreed to is going to be.
Thank you, Ken. And to anyone who has a question in the Q&A right now, we're just going to hold that until the end of the session. So keep those questions coming, and we hope to get to them before we wrap up today. So our next speaker is joining us from Santa Monica, California. Drew Johnstone is a senior sustainability analyst in the City of Santa Monica's Office of Sustainability and the Environment and leads the climate and energy team. He has 11 years of experience working with cities, businesses, schools, and homeowners on a variety of sustainability projects. In his current role, he focuses on Santa Monica's green building and energy policies and programs, including REACH codes and procurement of renewables. Drew is also responsible for implementing actions in the city's climate action and adaptation plan with a concentration on zero carbon buildings. Drew, we're so glad you could join us today, and I'm happy to turn it over to you right now.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. This is really awesome speaking at a Yale event. Last time I was on campus was 5 years ago when I was with a company called EcoMotion. We did this East Coast campus tour where we brought this representation of 1 ton of carbon dioxide to campus. It's a 32-foot diameter balloon that accurately represents the volume of a metric ton, which is what we talk about in our greenhouse gas inventories all the time. So you could think that, you know, every person essentially is responsible for about 10 tons of carbon dioxide emitted per year. So we had the Save a Ton campaign that we're going to college campuses. So just wanted to share that little personal connection I have with the Yale campus. So I'm going to talk to you today about Santa Monica's net zero goals. We have a long history of sustainable and climate action planning. We were one of the first cities in the country in 1994 to implement a sustainable city plan. And most recently in 2019, we adopted a climate action and adaptation plan, which lays out a roadmap for 80% reduction in emissions by 2030, with the ultimate goal to be carbon neutral by 2050 or sooner. And so I'll talk a little bit about some of the policies that and goals that we are working towards to meet those goals. And as Ken was mentioning, one of our main pathways to decarbonization is through electrification, and I'll share a little bit about how we support that. So in our CAP, as I mentioned, it's this roadmap to achieve 80% reduction by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2050 or sooner. And to do that, we sort of see these wedge graphs showing the different reductions based on different policies and programs. So as you can see, a lot of the reductions will come from state policies. We're really fortunate to be in California, which has a really aggressive renewable portfolio standard, which requires our electric utilities to be 100% renewable by 2045. And we're already at about 60% locally. So we've made great strides in decarbonizing our electricity sources. In addition, they have really strict low carbon fuel standards for vehicles and transportation. And this has created a really strong cap and trade system, which has been able to finance a lot of EV charging infrastructure. And the state also has pretty progressive new building codes that require new construction to be very energy efficient. And I'll talk a little bit about how Santa Monica goes above and beyond state codes by implementing REACH codes. And then locally, we are aiming for net zero carbon buildings. So requiring all electric new construction and reducing fossil fuel use in our existing buildings, which is notoriously difficult to retrofit, but we have a goal to reduce by 20% by 2030. And in addition, we have a zero waste goal, which means diverting 95% of materials from landfills by 2030. And sustainable mobility. We know that transportation is our largest source of emissions. So our goal by 2030 is to convert a large percentage of trips to active transportation modes and electrify vehicles in our community. And one thing I didn't mention as a goal is to be water self-sufficient by 2023. During the pandemic, we've had to hold off on some of our capital improvement projects, but Santa Monica has its own water utility. And to date, we've relied a lot on state water sources and importing water from even neighboring states. So our goal is to be water self-sufficient by using groundwater, which will save costs and reduce emissions and electricity associated with pumping and transporting water from far away. And so here are a few different ways that we are doing that. We give customers water use allowances. This isn't as strict as it might sound, like we're capping off water after their allowance is reached, but what it does do is we set a baseline for 2013 water use, and the water use allowance is 20% below that. And so our water rates are dictated on that water use allowance. So the first sort of tier is less expensive, and then if you exceed your water use allowance, the charges go up dramatically. And so this has been a really strong signal to the community and been really effective at reducing water use and converting a lot of landscapes and things like that. We also do water use consultations for high water users. It's been really effective at saving water. We have rebates for laundry, which we've learned is it's a much larger water user than we anticipated, as well as a cash for grass rebate. And we have a toilet direct install program that is funded from our water neutrality ordinance. And so this is for new construction. We have new projects aren't allowed to use any more water than the site's 5-year historical usage. So say a small house or a parking lot is even demolished and a mixed use building is going in its place. Obviously, the water usage is going to be much larger than the historical usage. So the project developer is required to implement water efficient fixtures elsewhere in the city or pay an in lieu fee. And so we've been able to receive a lot of funding through this program to pay for direct install programs throughout the city. So that's been really effective. So now I'm going to sort of shift over to decarbonization of our transportation and buildings. So as sort of Ken teed up, the path to our clean energy future in Santa Monica is to decarbonize our electricity sources and electrify our transportation buildings. So we're aggressively promoting active transportation and electric vehicle infrastructure. Our bus fleet that the city runs procured its first electric bus and plans to deploy an additional 18 by the end of this year and completely decarbonize by 2030. And on the building side, we are, obviously decarbonizing means designing, constructing, operating, and retrofitting buildings with zero emissions. And so the only way to do that we see is to electrify, since gas appliances are the cause of emissions in and around our buildings. And we're promoting distributed rooftop solar through a solarized program called Solar Santa Monica, which is a free consultation service to property owners. But we also require rooftop solar on all new construction, and we have since 2016. But we can't meet our net zero community goals with just distributed solar alone if we're going to meet these goals as quick as we want to. So utilizing utility scale renewables is really, really critical here. And so what we've done in Santa Monica is join a community choice aggregation program, which is basically a policy program that allows local governments to procure power on behalf of their residents, businesses, and municipal accounts from an alternative supplier than the investor-owned utility, while still receiving the transmission and distribution service from the existing utility. Now, there are 23 community choice aggregators in California, which serve about 1/3 of the state's population. And the Clean Power Alliance, the one that we have joined, is now entering its 3rd year of service. And it's been really, really successful. So here's a map of the Clean Power Alliance where we are. And so it represents 32 communities in Southern California. It's the largest community choice aggregator in the state. And we've seen fantastic participation. 90% of our customers are on 100% green power through this program. So this has just been fantastic. After joining Clean Power Alliance, our emissions community-wide dropped by about 1/5. Now, and before I leave this, Clean Power Alliance also has community programs. So not only do they supply clean energy, but now they're starting to develop electrification programs, battery energy storage incentives, and things like that. So they've been a great partner. The city of Santa Monica, if we look at our emissions by source, a vast majority comes from vehicle fuels, unfortunately. And electricity use in our buildings used to be the 2nd largest source of emissions. But thanks to joining the Clean Power Alliance, our community choice aggregator program essentially dropped our emissions by about 1/5. And that leaves natural gas in our buildings as the next largest source of emissions after vehicles. So as I mentioned, we're really looking to electrify at least 20% of our existing building stock through retrofit programs. And then ideally, if there are going to be natural gas use continuing in our community, offsetting that with renewable natural gas would be sort of the second best. So our gas utility is really working towards adding renewable natural gas to its pipelines. So what we're doing to support electrification in Santa Monica is adopt REACH codes for new construction that go above and beyond the state's requirements. And I'll talk a little bit in details in a second. Over the next year or so, I'm going to be looking at taking that step further and requiring all electric, or doing some sort of in lieu fee if any new buildings are built with gas to help fund electrification projects. For existing buildings, we are offering carrots at the moment. So we're doing rebates for electrification retrofits and EV charging infrastructure. We are partnering with property owners, such as our low-income housing partner called Community Corporation Santa Monica, to help them retrofit some of their existing apartment buildings to be all electric. And so we'll have these really great case studies for electrification retrofits. And over the next year, I'm going to be working on new policy, looking at large buildings in the city, talking 10,000 square feet and over, and coming up with some sort of emission reduction policy to give them a sort of timeline for when they need to start reducing emissions. And we are working diligently with our utilities and other cities throughout the state, which has been really important when coming up with policies and programs. We are working with the Building Decarbonization Coalition, which I highly recommend you check out because I think they're starting to develop branches throughout the country. And we are, with respect to new construction, we want to walk the walk with our city facilities. So all of our new buildings are all electric. Our new city hall is a Living Building Challenge certified, and we always meet LEED Gold or higher. And we're on ongoing basis, we are retrofitting our buildings to become all electric. And really importantly, we are really supporting the folks that are looking to get into the trades and the building decarb space by partnering with our community colleges and trade schools, and doing our own webinars and even YouTube playlists to teach people about building decarb, show them case studies and what it takes to actually implement some of these technologies. So with respect to REACH codes, I really wanted to focus on this because it's such a great way for cities looking to take a step and send a clear, important message on the direction of city policies. And so here are sort of 3 different pathways a city could look into to promote building decarb with new construction. You could go so far as to ban natural gas in new construction. And we've seen this at Berkeley, San Francisco, and over 20 cities in California. And sort of the next step down would be all electric required with some exemptions. So there are some harder to electrify sectors such as restaurants or labs or other industries. So a city could require all electric except for some of these harder to electrify sectors to start with. And the third option, which what Santa Monica did, is an all electric preferred REACH code. So we still allow mixed fuel, but we require them to meet much higher energy performance standards. And we also require solar on all new construction, and we also have an EV charger infrastructure REACH code as well. And another sort of facet to this the city could look into is if a building does install appliances with gas, require them to install the conduit and the electrical infrastructure needed for future retrofits. And so here's the process that a city would go through to implement an energy REACH code. And it could be a 6 to 9 month process. That's what we experienced. And so we sort of set this timeline looking at a 2020 implementation date. So we started this process in the middle of 2019, looking at electrification REACH code scopes and how we might implement it. We did a lot of internal outreach. We hosted 6 community workshops, inviting architects, builders, green building enthusiasts, other stakeholders to the table, let them be involved in the process, get feedback. And then most importantly, we utilize cost effectiveness studies because you can't implement a local energy code here in California unless it is cost effective and the code promotes buildings that use less energy than the state code. So these cost effectiveness studies were prepared by a statewide codes and standards team. So we utilized a lot of that work that was paid for by a statewide program and utilities. So after we got the cost effectiveness studies, we prepared staff reports and draft code language and presented to our city council so that the REACH code could be adopted. And then we sent it to the California Energy Commission for final approval. And EV charging was one of the aspects of our energy REACH code. So I wanted to just show you some happy local customers. So new buildings have to have EV charging infrastructure implemented. And to help ease the cost of existing buildings, we have a EV charging rebate program. And this is aimed towards multifamily buildings, which are notoriously difficult to add EV charging infrastructure. So we have a $1,000 rebate to help offset those costs. And we have an adder for low-income residents as well. So we give another $500 if the resident is low income. Again, on existing buildings, this is a new rebate program that the city just launched. We're focusing on the biggest gas users in the home, which are typically space heating and water heating, more so water heating here in Santa Monica than space heating, but we are offering $100 to $500 per appliance type in this new rebate pilot. So we just launched this a couple weeks ago. We're looking forward to seeing the participation we get. But again, we wanted to focus on the low-income community. So we are sending this rebate program out to, we have a disadvantaged community within Santa Monica. So we're doing a lot of outreach in that area. We offer additional rebates for low income, as well as low global warming potential refrigerants, and even panel upgrades. And these rebates could be stacked on the rebates offered by our utility, Southern California Edison. So I've just got a couple more slides. We've seen there's some challenges retrofitting existing buildings. Unless equipment fails, it's pretty low priority for property owners. But as you can guess, retrofitting a gas appliance to electric requires planning and design, and someone to look at the electric panel to see if there's enough capacity. And a lot of contractors just aren't aware or aren't familiar with selling heat pump technology. So these are some of the challenges that we're working through in the retrofit side of things. And lastly, I just wanted to share a couple tools that I use in the building decarb space. So it's really, collaboration is key. It takes a village to implement a lot of these policies. It's really important to learn what other cities in your region are doing and get lessons learned from them. And structure the effort to be community-led. I think workshops and stakeholders led meetings are really key there. And reach out to your local U.S. Green Building Council, the building decarbonization working groups in your area. I think a lot of the resources that you might need have already been developed or in process. And the work we do has real benefits, and communicating those is key. There's obvious safety and health benefits, and that's something that we learned from surveys, is that safety and health were really top of mind for folks when they are considering removing gas and going to electric. There are economic values for stakeholders, so communicate those as well. These things advance your city's climate goals, and now we're learning that they're aligning with state and even federal goals. So really communicate that. Partner and coalesce with statewide programs. I want to share the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, or USDN, is a fantastic resource for city officials or staff working on sustainability issues. The Building Decarb Coalition, again, I mentioned, is now going nationwide, so look them up. The New Buildings Institute and your local utilities all likely offer some programs and support as you decarbonize. And lastly, training and workshops. Here's a picture, obviously pre-COVID, but we hosted these sort of energy REACH code and building decarb workshops for the community. We got great interest from architects and builders. And a lot of these workshops and trainings can be funded by utilities, is what we've learned. And finally, offer incentives and creative levers. So as you can see, like we had our rebate, utilities often have rebates, but you could think of other creative things like high performance building competitions, zoning, tax credit, building size and height incentives, expedited permitting for contractors that go all electric. You could integrate all electric into affordable housing subsidies, as well as deed restrictions on sales of city land. So that sort of wraps it up. Now I'm happy to answer questions, and thank you very much again for having me.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Drew. So for the sake of time, we're going to take one or two questions from the fields, and then we'll move on to hearing from Jillian and what's going on in Natick, Massachusetts. So here's one question for you, Drew. Someone is interested in hearing how local elected officials address the potential added costs of retrofitted homes and water impact fees.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I mean, with retrofits, it can be expensive. That's one of the reasons why we wanted to offer this rebate pilot, just to sort of jumpstart the industry a bit. And also, I think with our new construction reach codes, that is a way for the sort of industry to learn about these technologies and what all electric means. With respect to retrofit and existing building programs, that's definitely something that we're going to have to look into as far as the cost impacts. So that's just something that has to be carefully considered when developing a program. I think one strategy is to offer sort of a longer timeline, like a 5 or 10 year sort of timeline for buildings to meet emissions reduction targets, and allow them to sort of retrofit as equipment dies. So that's one strategy to consider.
Excellent, thank you. So with that, we're going to turn it over to Jillian. So our final speaker today hails from Natick, Massachusetts. Jillian Wilson Martin is the Sustainability Director for the town of Natick. She has worked on sustainability initiatives for the town since 2014. Jillian is responsible for managing the community's climate mitigation and adaptation strategies and is in the process of finalizing a 2050 net zero action plan. Jillian leads the development of public renewable energy projects, the community's electricity aggregation program, energy efficiency and electrification projects in public buildings, and a variety of waste reduction programs, including curbside composting. Prior to working in local government, Jillian spent 10+ years as a consultant to Fortune 500 companies and large nonprofits, specializing in corporate responsibility strategy and communications. Jillian, thank you for joining us this afternoon, and happy to turn it over to you.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Wow, I have a huge crush on California and all of your climate goals. They're pretty amazing. Natick is a community that is about 20 miles west of Boston. We're a much smaller community than Santa Monica. We're a town with about 30,000 people. And in Natick, we started our net zero journey, I think, very similarly to many other communities. We really focused on energy efficiency to start with, and over time, our community has become more and more interested in how we can make a difference on climate. And now we are working against this net zero resolution that our local legislative body called Town Meeting adopted. And when we talk about net zero in Natick, we talk about, I think, a definition very similar to what Ken shared, which is how do we move from this imbalanced state where we are emitting much more than we're sequestering or producing in renewable energy into balance, where we are able to emit less than or emit the same amount or even less and become net positive by sequestering carbon and producing clean energy. So I mentioned our journey. This is kind of a timeline. We've been working on sustainability related programs since around 2004 when we joined Ecology, Local Governments for Sustainability. And since then we've worked through state programs. I saw in the questions, someone was mentioning the Green Communities program in Massachusetts, which is a program that's focused on energy efficiency. And Natick was one of the first communities to achieve a 20% reduction in the energy use from our school and municipal operations. And we were also one of the first communities in Massachusetts to start installing solar panels on our public buildings. And we have solar in almost all of our schools and our DPW, and senior center, and any new building that we build, we think about solar being part of it. And most recently, we've been working on this net zero goal, which is kind of taking the work we've been doing to the municipal operations and extending it to the community. And to do that, the first thing we really had to do was understand what our community's emissions were. And in Massachusetts, through our regional planning agency, we were able to partner with them to develop a tool that any Massachusetts city and town could use to create their own inventory at really no cost, just finding access to the data and giving them real clear directions on how to get that data, which I found to always be the hardest part of doing inventories. And I think this tool would actually be very applicable to communities in other states with some nuances. So it might be worth checking out, and the link is on the slide. So once we had that data, which we really just got last year, the beginning of 2020 is when we really had our inventory complete. We learned some really important things about how we wanted to build our net zero plan. And you'll see that we're kind of in an early stage versus Santa Monica, but we're going to be working on a lot of the same programs that they are, because truthfully, all communities across the United States and the world are going to be needing to do very similar things to get to net zero. It's just going to be some slight tweaks in terms of what makes sense for our communities. So what we learned with our inventory is, first, who's responsible for our emissions. Natick actually is kind of a retail hub that's west of Boston. And we were a little surprised to see that even though we are home to what we think of as a really popular mall and retail destination, the Natick Mall, 62% of our emissions still come from our residents. We also learned, what sources of fuels are generating the most emissions. And gasoline and emissions coming from transportation is really big, but our buildings are actually where most of our emissions come from. So with that information, we started to ask ourselves different questions. We wanted to understand, how can we make our electricity greener? Where does our electricity come from? And similar to Santa Monica, Natick is an aggregation community, meaning we can choose where our electricity comes from by picking the supplier for our electricity. And a number of communities in Massachusetts do this. And right now we choose to get more renewable energy for our supply than the state requires. So as a community, we're choosing to pick 13% more than the state's renewable portfolio mandate, which is similar to what's happening in California, where over time our state is gradually getting closer to 100% renewable. Though right now in Massachusetts, we aren't actually, we don't have a target to get to 100% yet. But because we have control over this in Natick through the aggregation, it's possible for Natick to get to 100% renewable electricity by 2030 by making small incremental increases in the additional amount of renewable energy we source through our aggregation program. So that's something that we're looking at. And it's really kind of the foundation of our net zero work, because if we're electrifying our buildings, but we're not actually cleaning the grid, then we're really doing that for nothing. So really focusing on where our energy comes from is kind of the core of what we all need to be thinking about. The other thing we learned through the MAPC tool, which is the greenhouse gas inventory tool, is how are our homes heated? And what was interesting to us is that we found that 28% of our homes are still actually heated from oil, and they're not connected to gas lines, and they're not using electric heat. So as we talked about Solarize earlier, we're actually working on a heat pump campaign in Natick that's going to be starting this spring and summer. And the focus will be, how do we reach out to those oil heating homes and also natural gas heating homes where they may be ready for a replacement of their heating system and get them to switch to heat pumps. So that's something we're learning about. And at the same time, we're working on how do we build new buildings that are net zero or net zero capable or ready. And in Massachusetts, we have a stretch code that is no longer especially stretchy. So we're, as a community, advocating for the state to adopt a net zero code that would prevent new buildings from locking in unnecessary emissions, and then also supporting changes here locally that can support a net zero future. Then we also looked at our vehicles. So vehicles, as you'll recall, gasoline was a really big contributor to our emissions, and it was mostly from residential cars in Natick. It was almost 90% of our emissions were from residents. And when we think about what we can do as a municipality, there's a lot of market and regulatory forces that we can't control as a small town in Massachusetts. But what we can control is the placement of electric vehicle charging stations, how we manage public charging stations in Natick. Right now, we have about 7 public charging stations that are scattered throughout town, mostly at public parks and public building parking lots. But we're interested in how can we require new construction, especially affordable housing and condominiums and large-scale residential projects to include electric vehicle charging, and how can that be mandated into their construction and design process. So those are things we're working on there. And ultimately, as we kind of worked through the data and we did research on what other cities and towns were doing across the country and in Massachusetts, as well as understanding what Massachusetts was doing, because our state does have great leadership on climate, we came up with these 6 strategies. And again, the first is really kind of the foundation, which is greening the grid with renewable sources. But we also want to produce more renewable energy locally. We want to make our homes and buildings super efficient. We want to electrify our heating and cooking equipment. We want to electrify our transportation. And we want to make walking, biking, and public transit the best way to get around. And we have 22 different actions that support each of these strategies. And the way that we came up with those actions, in addition to research, was we did a lot of collaboration with others. So really, I think involving the community, as Drew said, and learning from others is key to making these plans successful, I hope. We're actually talking to our select board about our plan tomorrow night. But along the way, we did a lot of community input surveys. We, at one point, because this has been such a journey, we did have in-person meetings, remember those? And we had focus groups, an online open house, and we really tried to be creative about reaching out to the community. And then I was really excited to hear Ken talk about getting to net zero equitably, because I feel like that's really important. And we asked ourselves, for each of the actions in our action plan, who has been historically impacted by these in our community? If we're going to increase the aggregations of renewable content, how will that change the price, and what will that mean for these communities? Who is going to be most impacted by the changes in our climate that we expect to see? If we're thinking about low-income communities and higher temperatures, how are they going to be able to afford the cost of air conditioning? And what things can we do to make this a more affordable and equitable transition for them? And then we also asked ourselves, what are the co-benefits of this plan? And you know, right now we have residents in Natick who are making money on solar arrays that they have. How do we make sure that those benefits aren't just limited to the wealthiest among us? So those are key things that we're thinking about. So our roadmap to net zero, we have a few milestones. This just shows you how over time, the strategies that we've set today are going to kind of percolate throughout our community. And it's really going to be a pretty massive sea change in how we operate our homes, how we get to work, how we live our lives, where our energy comes from. And you can see that from today to 2050, a lot is going to change. And this is a list of our actions. I won't go through all of them, but we have these kind of 3 sectors that we're working on: where our energy comes from, our homes and businesses, and how we get around. And for each of them, we have kind of 4 really priority actions. And we're actually only thinking about this in terms of the next 5 years. So we're not trying to predict the future, because we know a lot can change in 30 years. And we know that new technology is needed to get to net zero, but this is where we are today. And these are the things we think we can do that will set us up for success in the future. And then finally, how are we going to implement this plan? We're working on how we can create a governance structure that will support this. So, you know, I'm the sustainability director for our town, but just me working by myself is not going to create a sea change in the community. We need to have kind of an all hands on deck approach. So we're going to ask our select board to create a net zero action task force that would support the implementation. We want to do a lot of public engagement and education, especially with the vulnerable populations in Natick that we mentioned. Local government doesn't have a great history of building strong relationships with these people, and that's something we want to work on. And then partnerships and collaboration are really key. We need to work better with our local utility. We're really fortunate in having a partner in our state in terms of our governor and the legislature, and working with them to not only craft that legislation, but to partner with them in implementing and the goals that we both have. And I would love to work with all of you on this project, because I know that we're all in it together. So please don't hesitate to email me and we could collaborate.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jillian. So at this point, we have about 9 minutes or so left, and we are happy to take questions for Jillian, for Drew, and for Ken. And I've got one question teed up here for whoever wants to take it. How do you address social behavior to achieve a successful and better environment, in parentheses, the net zero environment?
Ken, do you want to start with your studies?
It's a broad question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure actually where to start on that one. Feel free to chime in with some specifics in this, either city, Natick or Santa Monica, because I think that maybe specifics are the best way to go.
Jessica, could you repeat the question?
I could. So how do you address the social behavior of people with regard to achieving the net zero goals?
I think in Natick, just the social behavior and understanding around climate change has really transformed in the 5 years or so that I've been working in Natick, which has been really interesting to see. I've definitely seen the trends that Ken talked about with once there's a solar array on one house on a street, 3 more pop up, and now it's hard to drive down a street in Natick and not see solar panels. I think that the conversation is also true about heat pumps in a way that I wasn't expecting. I think the more that you talk about electrification and people start to realize that it's kind of part of the future and part of what's going to be happening, it becomes part of the vernacular and is a more likely outcome when they're having to replace a system.
I'm going to add one thing is campaigns can really be successful. Everything Jillian said, it makes a lot of sense, but really just having a focal point to get people talking about things that they might not have otherwise been talking about, whether it's that solar panel on the rooftop that's visible, or whether it's the banner up there over the street, getting people talking and thinking about some things they might not otherwise slowly shifts in academic speak, the social norm about what people are comfortable with and what people think is a standard thing to do that they should be thinking about doing themselves.
Thank you. This next question is going to go to Jillian. What strategies is Natick exploring to engage more vulnerable residents?
It's a great question. We're working on it. We don't necessarily have the right answer. I think that there's some cities and towns out there who have done an incredible job. I would point to Providence, Rhode Island, and their climate justice plan is really impressive. In Natick, we would like to find funding to do some kind of opening conversations with these communities. So some of the cities and towns I admire in Massachusetts, I've seen them host dinners for those local communities and pay them to come to public meetings or to participate versus having the same players that are always at the public meetings that you have kind of oversharing their voices and not hearing the people who aren't as likely to engage. And we're starting to do some projects that focus on social resiliency and climate change, which is connected to net zero, but slightly different. We're going to be building a community garden at our housing authority. And part of the focus of that project is not just to grow food, but also to build this social resilience and connections to neighbors that might not have existed otherwise. So I think it's baby steps, but I think we also have to acknowledge where we're not experts, and this is a place where we're trying to improve.
Thank you. And this next question will be for Drew. So in New York, residential customers have to opt out of community choice aggregation programs, but we are not allowed to automatically enroll customers in a community solar project. So there's a bit of a disconnect. Is that the case in California? And if so, has Santa Monica addressed this issue?
So that's a state policy decision that I guess New York made. And in California, it's the opposite, where if you're in a community choice aggregation program, you're automatically enrolled and the customer has to opt out. So that obviously helps with participation. And in our community choice aggregation program, cities got to choose the default rate that customers were automatically enrolled in. And so out of our 32 communities and clean power lines, 11 cities, including Santa Monica, made 100% green power the default rate. And some other cities chose 50% renewable as default rate, and others chose 36% renewables as the default rate. And they all have different pricing tiers. So the 100% green power was about 7% cost premium compared to the investor-owned utility. But that was a decision that our community made to make the biggest impact from the start. And we've seen less than 5% people opt out back to the IOU, and a small percentage of folks opt down to the lower, less expensive tiers.
Thanks, Drew. And this next question might be for you as well, but Jillian, Ken, feel free to jump in. Do you address propane in your energy reach goals?
We see very little propane use in our region. It's probably more prevalent on the East Coast as a fuel supply, but here, I mean, propane is only used for barbecue grills. And so it's not something that we address specifically. But if we were to, we would consider propane a fossil fuel and still consider it as sort of a mixed fuel building, and try to implement some codes to restrict its use or disincentivize it somehow.
And we don't think about propane in great detail, except that we're looking, as Drew said, to switch from all fossil-based fuels to clean energy.
I can quickly chime in that my street, most people are on propane. And propane is interesting because it's a vast improvement over, in some ways, it's a vast improvement over oil, and many people have been switching from oil to propane. You are worried about leakage, of course, but it's not quite as bad as methane leakage in the studies that I've seen. But it's still fossil fuel, and so there's going to have to be a path towards getting off even propane as we move forward. So this is one of the areas that's a little bit harder because the economics for heat pumps, for example, aren't quite as good when you're comparing it to propane or natural gas in some cases, depending on where you are. So there are some additional challenges there that are really interesting to think about, and that's why active leadership, especially at the town level, and as well as people discussing what other options are out there, are very important. So for one example is switching right from hot water heaters, towards heat pump hot water heaters. That actually is starting to make a lot of sense, and the economics are starting to look good. So starting to chip away where we can immediately as the technologies continue to improve is, I think, a powerful way to go.
Excellent. Well, all right. I think we have to wrap it up here, but I want to give a sincere thanks to our three panelists for sharing their work and their insights. And thanks to you all on the line for joining us today. So this is the second installment of a 5-part webinar series featuring municipalities at the leading edge of sustainability from across the United States. We're holding these sessions every Tuesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we hope that you can join us next week where we're featuring communities embracing safe mobility for all. Event information, webinar recordings, and registration links will be posted in the chat box, so check that out. And we again hope you can join us and want to thank you all for spending some time with us this afternoon. So I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you all.